There has been news to come out about Unrivaled viewership been down nearly 70% from last year. Now, I'm going to tell y'all why this is bad. Because last year, it wasn't like they was cracking hella views to begin with. They wasn't even getting hella views at all last year. Now, this year, their views is down by nearly 70%.
A league that was supposed to change women's basketball forever just watched its audience disappear almost overnight. Not slowly, not gradually, it vanished. A nearly 70% drop in viewership, and that number isn't being exaggerated, spun, or taken out of context. It's real, and what makes it even worse is that the league wasn't pulling massive numbers to begin with. That's what should worry everyone paying attention. Because this isn't just a story about one struggling league. It's a warning, a preview, maybe even a blueprint for what's coming next. Just months ago, women's basketball felt untouchable. Headlines everywhere, record-breaking attendance, new fans flooding in, people who had never watched a single game suddenly planning their schedules around it. The narrative was simple. This momentum was unstoppable. But momentum is fragile.
Kind of lied about the numbers allegedly being what they was to close out the WNBA season. Now we're getting data from the Unrivaled pretty much claiming that their numbers are shot, gone, toast, finito, ain't looking good at all. I'm here to tell you the same thing is going to happen for the WNBA this season. The exact same effect that Unrivaled is seeing is going to happen. I've been telling y'all, the WNBA viewership has been on a...
When something relies on excitement instead of loyalty, all it takes is one shift, one bad experience, one uncomfortable moment, one storyline that turns people off, and the crowd quietly walks away. No outrage, no protests, they just stop watching. And that's exactly what appears to be happening now. The scary part isn't the low numbers themselves, it's what those numbers represent. Because when a product backed by star power, heavy promotion, and major optimism can't hold even a small audience, it raises a much bigger question. Did the hype disappear, or did the audience realize something they didn't like? And once casual viewers decide they're done, they don't come back easily. What we're seeing right now may not be a temporary dip. It may be the moment the illusion finally cracked, and if that's true, the consequences could reach far beyond one league. Because this collapse didn't come out of nowhere, and what happened next might shock a lot of people. The collapse didn't happen quietly, it happened in plain sight. Reported viewership numbers show a drop so steep it's hard to spin, not 10%, not 20%, nearly 70%, and that's what makes this situation different from a normal downturn. This wasn't a slow bleed where audiences gradually drifted away. This was a sudden rejection. Primetime games struggling to pull more than 40 or 50,000 viewers. Let that number sit for a second. Not hundreds of thousands, not even close, tens of thousands. For a league that launched with massive hype, star recognition, and constant online promotion, those numbers are brutal. Especially when you remember that last year's audience wasn't exactly massive to begin with. That's why calling this a dip misses the point. This isn't a dip, it's a collapse. And what makes it even harder to ignore is the timing. These numbers didn't fall during some quiet off-season lull. They came right after the most talked-about year women's basketball has ever had. Record attendance, viral moments, national conversations, everything that was supposed to build momentum. Instead, the floor gave out. Some people online brushed it off at first, saying it was early, saying audiences needed time, saying the format would grow on people. But the drop didn't stabilize. It got worse. Each game told the same story, and the story wasn't complicated. People weren't just tuning out, they weren't tuning in at all. And this wasn't some low-budget experiment either. This was a league built with confidence, ownership stakes handed out, big names attached, public belief that this was a guaranteed success, the kind of confidence you only have when you think the audience is locked in. That confidence turned into silence fast. What's especially alarming is that this kind of drop doesn't usually come from confusion or lack of awareness. When audiences are curious but unsure, numbers wobble. When they're excited, numbers grow. but when they're done, they vanish. And that's exactly what these figures suggest. This wasn't people checking it out and deciding later. This looks like people deciding immediately that they weren't interested and moving on without a second thought. Which leads to the most uncomfortable realization of all. If this many viewers disappeared this quickly, then the problem isn't marketing, it isn't scheduling, and it definitely isn't patience. The problem is interest. And once interest is gone, no amount of hype can bring it back overnight. But the real reason this happened isn't obvious yet, and it starts with a group the league was never prepared to protect. The key to understanding all of this comes down to one group most leagues struggle to keep: casual fans. Not diehards, not lifelong supporters. Casual fans are different. They're curious, not committed, interested, but not invested. They don't build their lives around a sport, and they don't argue online when things go wrong. They simply watch when it feels fun and disappear when it doesn't. In 2024, women's basketball attracted something it had never truly had before: a massive wave of casual viewers. People who couldn't name more than a couple players suddenly tuning in. Viewers who didn't grow up watching the league, but were pulled in by moments, personalities, and storylines. For the first time, the audience wasn't just loyal, it was expanding. That kind of audience growth is rare, and it's fragile. Casual fans don't stick around out of principle. They don't feel obligated to support the game. They show up because they're entertained, welcomed, and curious about what happens next. The second that feeling fades, they're gone. No announcement, no backlash, just silence. That's why losing casual fans is so dangerous. Hardcore supporters will argue, complain, and still watch. Casual viewers won't. They don't have childhood memories attached to teams. They don't care about league politics. They don't even care if a league survives or fails. They just want a good experience. And here's the part many people overlook. Casual fans aren't lost because of one bad game. They're lost because of one moment that makes them feel uncomfortable, unwelcome, or disconnected. It could be chaos instead of competition, drama instead of basketball, a tone that feels more hostile than fun. Once that line is crossed, they don't wait for improvement, they move on. That's exactly why the recent viewership collapse matters so much. Those numbers don't just represent people skipping a game. They represent people who tried the product, didn't like the experience, and decided not to return. And when casual fans leave, they don't trickle back slowly, they vanish all at once. Which explains why the drop looked so sudden. The interest didn't fade over time, it snapped. And once you understand that, the next question becomes unavoidable. What exactly pushed them away? Because it wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't inevitable. And that's where the real controversy begins. So what actually pushed those casual fans away? That's where things get uncomfortable and where the conversation usually gets messy, because there isn't one single moment you can point to. There isn't one headline that explains everything. Instead, there's a growing pattern that many viewers say made the experience harder to enjoy. Over the past season, online discussion shifted. Instead of talking about great plays or breakout performances, a lot of the attention moved toward chaos. Excessive physicality, constant confrontations, moments that felt less like competition and more like hostility. None of this is confirmed as intentional, but perception matters more than intent when it comes to casual viewers. For people who grew up watching basketball, rough play isn't shocking. They understand the line between physical defense and aggression. Casual fans don't. They don't know the context. They don't care about league history. They just know what they're seeing and whether it feels entertaining or uncomfortable. And for many of them, reports suggest that lines started to blur. There were clips circulating online that overshadowed the games themselves. Conversations focused more on controversy than highlights. Instead of excitement building, tension took over. And for new viewers, that's a problem, because they didn't show up for drama, they showed up for basketball. Another issue that kept coming up in fan discussions was tone. Some casual viewers felt like outsiders, like the product wasn't being made for them, or that their presence wasn't really wanted. That may not have been the intention, but again, perception decides everything. If someone feels unwelcome, they don't push through it, they leave. And once the narrative shifts from "this is fun" to "this feels exhausting," the damage is already done. What's important here is how quickly this all happened. Casual fans didn't slowly drift away over multiple seasons. They arrived, they watched, and then many of them quietly exited. No petitions, no complaints, just empty seats and shrinking numbers. That's why blaming this on short attention spans or temporary hype misses the point. These viewers didn't leave because something newer came along. They left because the experience stopped matching what pulled them in. And once casual fans associate a sport with frustration instead of enjoyment, it's almost impossible to reverse that impression. Which brings us to an even bigger realization. This wasn't just about one league's choices. It was a warning sign, and the league that should be paying the closest attention might not be the one taking the hit first. This is where Unrivaled stops looking like a standalone failure and starts looking like a warning. On paper, the league had everything going for it. Recognizable names, a condensed schedule designed to make every game feel important, a fast-paced format that was supposed to be easier to watch, easier to follow, and easier to sell. The assumption was simple: if fans loved women's basketball a few months ago, they'd show up for this too. They didn't. And that's the part people keep trying to explain away. Some say it's the 3-on-3 format. Others blame timing, promotion, or visibility. But none of those explanations line up with how sudden the drop actually was. When a format doesn't connect, viewership usually fades gradually as curiosity wears off. What happened here was immediate. That suggests something deeper. This wasn't fans trying something new and deciding they preferred the old version. This looked more like fans deciding they weren't interested in the product at all, regardless of the packaging. Same athletes, same talent pool, same personalities, different logo. Same result. That's why a lot of analysts online have started framing Unrivaled as a preview instead of a problem. A smaller stage revealing a much larger issue. Because if interest was truly strong, even a niche version of the sport would hold a baseline audience. It didn't. And that's where things get uncomfortable for the WNBA. If casual fans exited the ecosystem entirely, then Unrivaled didn't lose them, it simply exposed their absence. The league didn't scare viewers away on its own. It showed what happens when hype fades and curiosity dries up. Some reports claim internal expectations were far higher than what actually happened. Again, those details aren't public, but the reaction says plenty. Silence replaced confidence. Celebration turned into damage control, and the conversation shifted from growth to survival almost overnight. That doesn't happen unless the gap between expectation and reality is massive. The scary part is that Unrivaled wasn't competing against the WNBA. It was supposed to complement it, feed off the same audience, extend engagement into the off-season, keep momentum alive. Instead, it revealed how thin that momentum really was. Which leads to an unavoidable conclusion. If this is what happens when interest is tested outside the main league, what happens when the main league comes back and expects those casual fans to return automatically? Because audiences don't reset just because a season starts. And the next signs that insiders are worried might already be slipping through if you know where to look. The most telling warnings rarely come from headlines. They come from the people who have seen the numbers up close and suddenly start choosing their words very carefully. Over the past few months, comments from players, board members, and union voices have taken on a noticeably different tone. Less celebration, less optimism, more emphasis on sustainability, on structure, on what actually works long-term. Those aren't buzzwords, they're red flags. When someone inside the system starts talking about running a real business or building something sustainable, it usually means the current model isn't doing either. That kind of language doesn't appear when everything is healthy. It appears when projections don't match reality. What makes this moment especially tense is the timing. These conversations are happening alongside ongoing labor discussions involving the WNBPA. On the surface, the focus is simple: better conditions, better pay, a fairer structure. But underneath, that is a much harder question: where is the money actually coming from? Because revenue doesn't come from hype, it comes from viewers. And if viewership is shrinking, every demand becomes harder to justify. That doesn't mean players are wrong to ask for more. It means the math starts working against everyone at the same time. Owners hesitate, investors pull back, networks get cautious. Suddenly, what felt inevitable starts to feel fragile. Some reports claim internal expectations around audience growth were wildly optimistic. Again, those numbers aren't public, but the shift in messaging suggests a course correction is happening in real time. When confidence disappears this quickly, it's usually because the data left no room for denial. And here, where the irony creeps in. While concerns about sustainability grow louder, a parallel experiment is struggling to prove its own viability. A league launched with star power, creative freedom, and heavy backing can't generate enough consistent interest to stabilize. That reality doesn't stay isolated. It echoes through every boardroom discussion, every negotiation, every long-term plan. People inside the ecosystem are watching this closely, not publicly, not loudly, but carefully. Because they understand something fans rarely see. You can survive criticism, you can survive controversy, you cannot survive indifference. And indifference is exactly what collapsing viewership represents. That's why the tone has shifted, why optimism sounds restrained, why statements feel more guarded than celebratory. The alarm bells aren't ringing out loud yet, but they're definitely humming in the background. And that brings us to the most dangerous possibility of all. What happens if this tension doesn't resolve quietly? Because the next chapter doesn't involve ratings charts or social media debates. It involves something that could shut everything down completely. This is where the situation stops being theoretical and starts becoming dangerous. Because all of this tension, the shrinking audience, the uneasy financial math, the quiet panic behind closed doors, is colliding with a very real deadline. If ongoing labor negotiations fail, there's a growing possibility that the 2026 season doesn't happen at all. And that isn't just a scheduling problem, it's an extinction-level risk. Lockouts don't just pause leagues, they erase momentum, they break habits, they give casual fans an excuse to move on permanently. Loyal supporters wait it out, casual viewers don't. When the product disappears, they fill that time with something else, and they rarely come back when the lights turn back on. That's what makes this moment so volatile. The league just experienced the most visible year it's ever had. New fans arrived in massive numbers. Attendance surged, merchandise moved, the conversation felt alive. And yet, instead of consolidating that growth, everything now feels like it's on pause, or worse, unraveling. If a season is lost, the damage won't show up immediately. It'll show up quietly: ratings that never rebound, empty seats that don't refill, sponsors that hesitate, networks that renegotiate. That kind of loss doesn't announce itself, it lingers. And here's the harsh reality no one likes to say out loud. Casual fans don't distinguish between reasons. They don't care who's right or wrong in a labor dispute. They don't follow negotiation details. All they see is absence. And absence tells them the product isn't essential. That's the trap. Because once a sport stops feeling essential, it stops being part of someone's routine. And once it's gone from their routine, it's gone from their life. Some reports suggest there's little appetite for compromise on either side. Again, those details aren't fully public, but the messaging has grown firmer, not softer. Deadlines matter, and missed deadlines have consequences that go far beyond one season. What makes this especially risky is that the audience being lost now isn't hypothetical. It already showed up once. It already left once. Asking that same group to wait through uncertainty and then return out of loyalty is unrealistic. They didn't come for loyalty in the first place. Which leads to the most uncomfortable truth of all. Even if the league survives a lockout, it may not survive what comes after. Because the fans who leave during silence don't return for noise. And that's why the next belief, that one superstar can fix everything, might be the most dangerous assumption of all. At some point, every struggling league reaches for the same solution: put everything on one star and hope it works. And for women's basketball, that star is Caitlin Clark. There's no denying her impact. She brought attention the sport had never seen before. Millions of new eyes, packed arenas, national conversations that extended far beyond basketball circles. For a moment, she didn't just elevate the league, she changed how people talked about it. But here's the part nobody likes to admit. One player can open the door. She cannot hold it open by herself. Casual fans didn't show up just because of talent. They showed up because the experience felt exciting, accessible, and fun. That experience has to exist beyond one jersey, one matchup, one highlight clip. Otherwise, the interest becomes conditional, and conditional interest doesn't last. That's the danger of building a league survival around a single draw. If a team struggles, numbers dip. If the surrounding games feel chaotic or unenjoyable, viewers don't stick around after her time slot. If the product around her doesn't deliver, fans don't wait patiently for it to improve. They leave again. That's not pressure any athlete should carry. And it's not a business model any serious investor would accept. No league in the modern sports landscape survives by leaning entirely on one name. Not the NBA, not the NFL, not global soccer. Stars amplify strong systems, they don't replace them. What's especially risky here is expectation. Once fans are trained to believe one player will save the league, disappointment becomes inevitable. Because even elite performances can't fix structural problems. They can't stabilize ratings across an entire schedule. They can't erase negative perceptions overnight. And when numbers don't rebound the way people hope, the narrative turns quickly. Not on the league, but on the player. That's unfair, and it's dangerous for long-term growth. The truth is simple, but uncomfortable. If the games themselves aren't consistently entertaining, if the atmosphere feels tense instead of inviting, if casual viewers don't feel like they belong, no superstar can compensate for that. Fans don't tune in to prove a point, they tune in to enjoy themselves. And right now, the league is asking one player to carry the weight of an entire ecosystem that hasn't fully addressed why viewers left in the first place. Which brings us to the final question, the one leadership can't afford to ignore. Because this isn't about stars, formats, or temporary hype anymore. It's about whether the product itself gives people a reason to come back at all. This is the moment where excuses stop working. When the next season arrives, assuming it does, the numbers are going to speak immediately. Not weeks in, not months later, instantly. And if viewership drops 40, 50, or even 60% compared to last year, there won't be anywhere left to hide. Because at that point, every convenient explanation runs out. It won't be the schedule, it won't be the broadcast partner, it won't be timing, marketing, or bad luck. It will be the simplest answer: the audience that showed up once decided not to return. That's what makes the current situation so fragile. Casual fans don't need a reason to leave, but they do need a reason to stay. And right now, the league hasn't clearly shown them one. The assumption seems to be that interest will reset on its own, that fans will come back just because games are back on the calendar. That almost never happens. Entertainment doesn't work that way anymore. Sports don't work that way. Viewers have options, endless ones, and when someone mentally moves on from a product, reclaiming their attention is harder than attracting it in the first place. What Unrivaled exposed wasn't just low demand, it exposed indifference, the most dangerous reaction an audience can have, not anger, not criticism, silence. Silence means people didn't care enough to react at all. And silence is contagious. If leadership looks at those numbers and treats them as an anomaly instead of a message, the same pattern will repeat. Hope will replace strategy. Optimism will replace reform. And when ratings fall again, the shock will feel familiar, but the damage will be worse. This isn't about negativity or rooting for failure. It's about recognizing that momentum doesn't survive neglect. It has to be protected, guided, earned repeatedly. Casual fans already gave the league a trial run. They showed up, they watched, they evaluated the experience, and many of them quietly decided it wasn't for them. That decision doesn't reverse itself automatically. If nothing changes, if the tone stays the same, if the experience feels just as exhausting, if the product doesn't clearly prioritize watchability, then the next decline won't be surprising. It'll be predictable. And that's the part that should worry everyone involved. Because when reality keeps sending the same message, ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just guarantees the next collapse will be even louder. This is the crossroads moment. What's happening right now isn't just about one failed experiment or one disappointing ratings chart. It's about whether the league is willing to confront an uncomfortable truth before it's too late. Because the numbers coming out of Unrivaled weren't random. They weren't unlucky. They were a signal. A signal that the audience isn't guaranteed, that hype doesn't convert into loyalty by itself, and that casual fans, the very group that powered the biggest year in league history, don't wait around hoping things improve. They already moved on. The most dangerous mistake now would be pretending this is just noise. Pretending next season will magically fix everything. Pretending one player, one storyline, or one marketing push can undo months of damage. That kind of thinking doesn't lead to recovery, it leads to repeat collapse. Because once fans stop caring, getting them back requires more than words. It requires change, real change, a product that feels fun again, games people actually want to watch, not just support out of obligation. A league that understands attention is earned every single night. Unrivaled's struggles aren't happening in isolation. They're a preview of what happens when interest fades and nothing replaces it. Ignore that lesson, and the consequences won't show up gradually, they'll hit all at once. So the question isn't whether women's basketball can survive. The question is whether the people in charge are willing to admit what went wrong, adjust course, and give viewers a reason to come back before silence becomes permanent. Because once casual fans are gone for good, no amount of hype can bring them back. And the clock is already ticking.